Welcome back to Off the Pitch, the podcast where we chat with individuals working within and shaping the game of soccer from off the pitch. In today's episode, we're joined by Urel Martinez. Uriel is currently the Chief Revenue Officer of LA Galaxy. In this episode, we uncovered Uriel's background and his jump from MLB to the NBA and ultimately today to the MLS. What he looks for in employees at LA Galaxy, how he sold out an 82,000-seater stadium and broke an all-time MLS attendance record, and so much more. This was a fantastic conversation with a truly incredible and inspiring individual, and I know that you're going to like this one. So, with that in mind, let's get into the episode. Okay. Uriel, thank you so much for coming on today. Obviously, we have done a bit of digging into your background of what we could find and know a bit about yourself. But for those who don't know who you are, could you just give us a quick rundown of your career so far, as well as exactly who Urel Martinez is?
Yeah, Matt. Well, I appreciate that. I've been now in the industry for almost 20 years, which when I say that out loud, it's really hard to believe as somebody who never really thought about a career in sports. My goal in college was to actually work in federal law enforcement. My ultimate goal was to work in the FBI. I got a degree from UC Irvine in criminology, law, and society. I actually interned with the postal inspector. I got an opportunity to work with some special agents, which was a wonderful opportunity for me to learn about that career. And honestly, when I got into sports, it was just strictly from a passion of just being a big sports fan. For whatever reason, I came upon this sports website, and this was back in 2005, a website called teamworkonline.com. And it just had a list of different sports jobs that you could apply for. And at the time, it was relatively new concepts. There weren't a lot of platforms that allowed you to kind of really easily see the different available positions out in the market. And I remember looking and I saw a job for the LA Dodgers, and being a big Dodger fan. It was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. And honestly, again, not knowing that you could actually work in sports, in my thought process, especially growing up, it was really the only chance that you had to work or be in professional sports was on the field. So seeing an opportunity like this on the business side, again, being a 22-year-old kid, not really having an understanding of what that meant. So just kind of applying and getting an opportunity in that was really kind of how I got my foot in the door, to kind of understand what it meant to be working in sports.
Awesome. And then we know you made a jump after that to another sport, and you went over to the Clippers, and obviously now you're at the Galaxy as well. So you just chat through briefly as well that transition to basketball, and then of course the big move that we're here to talk about in soccer.
Yeah, so I did one season with the Dodgers, and really it was a customer service, very entry level position. I was tasked at the time with walking around the stadium and fielding complaints from fans who were either upset with parking, upset with the stadium experience, or whatever it is. I was kind of the punching bag that they sent us out for. And they gave us these really small index cards that we had to write down what the incident was. And that was it. And on non-game days, I was basically tasked with mailing out pocket schedules. And don't even know if they still do those or if those still exist. But that was really the primary function of the role. But you know what, Matt, what really I think helped me there was, for whatever reason, I had a really great knack with talking with people and communicating with people and being able to listen to what they were saying. And again, really the only time I engaged with fans was when they were having a bad experience. So being able to understand their perspective and being able to calm them down and reassure them that there was something that we could do to make their experience better, if not there, but in the future. I realized pretty quickly that I had a really good understanding on how to do that. And it was a skill that I didn't really know that I had, and that I quickly developed in the season that I was there, that ultimately, even today, has helped me become the person that I am today on being able to effectively communicate with others in a very short period of time, because they want to go back to the game. They're there to have fun. They're not there to talk to me. But being able to develop and build that rapport with people so quickly, that was something even back then, 20 years ago, that I knew that I had a talent for. Transitioning over to the NBA was obviously another dream, and being such a big basketball fan and getting a chance to actually work in it was a dream come true. There was a point there early on that I would work part-time for the Clippers, and then I would work part-time for the Dodgers. So I was going from Staples Center at the time, driving over to Dodger Stadium, and I would work multiple events in one day. And that was so surreal to me, to drive from Staples Center and be in the building and see everything and feel everything from there, and then obviously driving over to the historic Dodger Stadium and working in for the LA Dodgers. Looking back, and even then, I kind of felt like, man, this is really, really special to be able to do this. But again, not really something that I thought was going to be something that was going to be 20 years in the making, right? Like for me, this was just a part-time job to live out your dream. And actually, I wouldn't even say live out my dream, because I didn't even know that you could actually do this. But at the time, like really taking advantage of this opportunity to work in sports on something that I didn't really know that existed until I had a chance to go back and kind of pursue my career in federal law enforcement. And similarly to the LA Dodgers experience, Matt, I realized pretty quickly that I was really good at sales. And I had the unique ability to be able to engage with people over the phone and build their trust and build rapport in a matter of seconds. And this was back at a time when people still picked up their phone. I don't know how many people pick up their phone nowadays, but I had that unique ability to take a spreadsheet with just numbers and a name and be able to call and build that rapport instantly with fans. And it was something that I realized pretty quickly that I was effective on. And it was something that my manager and the rest of the staff realized that I was pretty effective on. And that didn't really take much effort on my part. And again, I'm not the smartest person in the world. I certainly don't claim to be. But being able to effectively communicate with others and build that rapport was something, again, that not only that I knew that I could do in person with my short time at the LA Dodgers, but now I realized that I could do it over the phone. And it was just such a foreign concept to me that we were able to sell people stuff over the phone, right? They would just pick up and we would say, hey, you've been to a game before, and do you want to buy this season ticket, or do you want to buy this partial plan or this package? But we were doing it, and like it was something that was incredible to me. Obviously, we had a ton of training, and one thing I remember going back, and I remember doing the sales training before we actually got on the phone at the Clippers, and I remember walking out of there thinking, "There's no way, there's no way. Like I'm not coming back to this. You're telling me, like I have a bachelor's degree, right? Like I don't need to be cold calling people. Like I didn't go to school for this. Like I should be getting another job, right? I don't want to get hung up on, or like tell people that are telling me they're not interested or get hung up on. Like I don't need this. Like I remember going through that training process and thinking like I'm not coming back. And for whatever reason that morning, and this is a true story, I swear, I remember that morning I woke up and thinking like what do I have to lose? Like I have this job already. Well, I'm not going to do it forever. Um, they're not paying me literally anything. I think at the time minimum wage was $675 an hour and 3% commission. So I wasn't doing it for the money. But I said, hey, you know what? Let me give it a shot at least until I can kind of get this other process going. And I went back, and obviously that turned out to be pretty good for me during my time there. Uh, Fast forward, I guess, to 12 years. I ultimately ended up being there for 12 years. I held multiple different positions, anywhere from ticket sales manager, director of sales, both overseeing season tickets, partial plans, um, event suites, and then ultimately transitioning over to overseeing groups. So I had my hands in a lot of different buckets. Obviously being there 12 years, you are able to establish a lot of the rules and policies and culture. So that was a very fortunate opportunity that I fell into, to be at a place for that long and to build kind of that amount of tenure.
And then, so the big move to the Galaxy, how did that come about? And also, I know you've said you had this interest in sports. Was soccer part of your growing up?
No, no. I'm born and raised in Southern California. I grew up playing baseball. I loved basketball. I grew up playing football. Those were kind of my passion. That was my sports. That's what I wanted to do. Is really what I followed. In soccer, like most people, I would pay attention when the World Cup would come around, and I would watch the World Cup, but never really anything outside of that. And honestly, up until working here, coming up on now 7 years, I didn't really understand a lot of the dynamics of soccer. As you know, it's really unique on how the leagues work across the world, right? You have the Premier League, you have Serie A, you have the La Liga, you have the Bundesliga, all of these different leagues, and somebody coming in and not really understanding how those kind of all mesh together and kind of how they don't. It was pretty overwhelming. And I remember thinking at my time in the NBA, there was a lot of soccer fans working for the Clippers. Um, they got hyped up about this thing called Champions League. And now looking back, I realize how silly that was, that I had no idea what that was and how it worked, right? Because I'm thinking, okay, well, why is Chelsea playing Barcelona? Aren't they in two different leagues? And aren't they in season, or are they not in season? And then some of the games would come on like in the middle of the afternoon on like a Wednesday. And I'm like, wait, is this game recorded? And like they're just showing it now in the States, or is it live, right? All silly questions now that I've realized that I'm asking, obviously understanding the dynamic and how it works now. But at the time, being such an NBA fan and an NFL fan and MLB fan, and not really having an understanding of the soccer world, that seemed to be really daunting to try to understand. But the transition was more of a business decision than anything. Having worked in the NBA and having worked for the Clippers for 12 years, I was very fortunate. I had great leadership. My former boss, Carl Lair, who had been there for ultimately ended up almost being there for 40 years. He was a mentor to me. He essentially built such a great culture there of talent that it made it easy for me to be there for that long. And then I think you never really realize how much you are leaving on the table sometimes by being somewhere for that long, because a lot of the policies and a lot of the rules and really the culture is from you. So you kind of don't even realize that you may stop learning a little bit because you're so in your comfort zone, because you know everything and you've established a lot of the rules that you kind of live by. And you kind of just are not necessarily afraid, but you're just kind of comfortable, right? And sometimes you don't even realize it until you leave. And I didn't, and that was what happened with me, is I didn't realize how comfortable I was there and how much more I needed to learn from my standpoint until I made the transition for the Galaxy. And the one unique thing about the LA Galaxy is we're not just the Galaxy, right? We're owned by AEG, which also has a massive portfolio in and of itself. So, transitioning over here, not only was I transitioning over to a new team, but I was transitioning over to a massive company with a huge portfolio and a ton of opportunity with a lot of different staff and a lot of different experiences versus just working locally just for one team with a very small staff. So that was kind of a little bit of a transition. And I also, one of the unique things about my time in the NBA is I got to experience a little bit of an owner transition. So in 2014, Steve Ballmer purchased the Clippers. And so, that dynamic also changed between what was kind of a very different uh, leadership previous to that, and then transitioning over to Steve's leadership. Just different, but certainly, if you know anything about Steve Ballmer, he's very passionate. He's a winner. He doesn't accept losing in any circumstances, and he brought that mentality out of the gate, and we felt it, and it was definitely fun to be a part of and experience, especially someone of his the success that he's had, to be able to interact with him and engage with him was an unbelievable experience. Very intuitive, very smart, and for not really knowing a lot of our business when we would kind of go through that process with him, I mean, it was incredible how quickly he picked up things from that standpoint.
And they're obviously, and Steve in particular, doing massive things with the new, the arena and
Yeah,
rebuilding
I'm not
that and
surprised.
making
I'm
it
not
look like
surprised.
a Borussia Dortmund game. It looks like
Yeah,
it'll be.
yeah.
But yeah, so it sounds like you've been, working under some tremendous leaders, and now, of course, you yourself are in a very high leadership role. Sports is a completely different kind of organization and the market that you play in, and with that, you're mentioning culture, and I think culture is bound to be different in a sports organization than a tech company or a finance company. So from your experience, both working under the mentors and the leaders you've been under, and now yourself and the culture you're looking to build, what do those ingredients look like for a high performing sports front office?
I've been very fortunate and blessed to for me, sometimes I wonder what it's like to actually have a real job, because I've been in this for so long. I never, outside of just a few part-time jobs, before college and during college, I really haven't had anything outside of sports. So for me, this is everything. This is really all that I know, right? The culture, the vibe, the experience, and you know sports culture is unique because a lot of the times what ends up happening when you work in sports, or what you hear a lot of the times, is sports teams can go through people because people want to work there, right? They have the logo, they have the recognition, and people come to them. So versus maybe some of the other companies where it's a little bit harder to attract, recruit, and retain talent. One of the fortunate things working on the sports side is that you're never short of candidates, right? And I think what ends up happening and the challenges that we have, and not only recruitment and retention, but also just culture, is really building a place where people genuinely want to work outside of just the passion that they have for the club that they represent. And so that means financial growth, professional growth, and giving talented individuals the platform to be successful. A lot of the times, what ends up happening, and some of the stories that you hear, is, hey, look, this is kind of the way that it is, and you know, good luck, right? And my philosophy as a leader, and having had success on building long-standing cultures wherever I've gone, is you want to treat people with respect, and you want to give them the opportunity to grow, right? Like one of the things that I always stress to my staff and my leaders and my managers and my leadership team is I want them to buy their dream car while working here, right? I want them to purchase a home when they're working here, because ultimately that makes my life a lot easier, because I don't have to motivate them, right? I'm not having to stand over their shoulder and say, hey, you got to hit these KPIs, or hey, why is this game struggling, or why haven't we done this or accomplished this? Because ultimately their own ambition and desires and the things that they're doing are going to be those driving forces for them. And not only that, they're going to see this as a uh, as a role that they can actually grow in, right? It turns from a job into a career. And that's always been an important part to me. Especially, you don't find a lot in sports, because again, there's so much demand and so much turnover, because some clubs or some leaders aren't willing to kind of meet in the middle, right? It's either kind of like, hey, look, here's where we're at, this is where you're at, and there's really nowhere in between.
Yeah, I mean, that has been I think a common theme of anyone that I've spoken to, and I had maybe a half year stint being like a one man marketing and salesperson for a NISA club up here in the Bay Area where David and I are. That didn't even see out its first season, so that was a struggle. But I know what
Yeah.
the being in the weeds of that looks like. But what about yourself? Do you think it is that has allowed you to go from being the guy with the cards, getting the complaints, at a sports game, to now being the chief revenue officer of, one of the probably the most well known MLS club in the world?
Yeah. Probably because I don't even really see it that way. And I say that with all, as humble as I can. Like for me, I just see myself as the same kid who was taking complaints as a 22-year-old, now as a chief revenue officer. And I think that's kind of my platform is anybody who walks into my office, whether I was a senior vice president or vice president or director or manager or account executive or inside sales rep, like for me, it's the same person, right? Yes, like my title is different. I have a lot more experience, but ultimately I am who I am. And that to me is an important part of my platform is I'm going to work hard. I'm going to be extremely disciplined in how I approach everything and I'm going to get the job done. And that same philosophy as a inside sales rep making 3% commission, 675 an hour is really the same philosophy that I have as a CRO, right? And like sometimes it's hard to kind of share that with other people because they expect like this different type of mentality where it's like no, like I think I've always been this way. Like I remember having and sometimes it's not really that great, Matt. Like sometimes I wish I wasn't, right? Like sometimes I wish I wasn't so disciplined from that standpoint, or I wasn't that ambitious because, sometimes it could be exhausting because nothing ever seems to be good enough. Nothing ever seems to be what it is. You're always striving for that next opportunity, right? You close a deal and you're like, okay, what's next? Right? You sell at a game. We just sold out our second home game of the season, which was an incredible feat coming off of a massive home opener against Inter Miami and Lionel Messi. And then it's like, okay, well, the next game's March 30th, and how's that going, right? And that's kind of the world that we live in, and it's competitive. I have this conversation with a lot of my leadership team, in that you have to compete, right? You have to compete every single day, every single game, because if you don't, as you know, and everything that you just listed about the LA Galaxy and the notoriety and the recognition and the brand awareness that the club has globally and domestically, is that there's somebody out there that wants your job, right? There's somebody out there that is probably working harder than you or thinking about different ways that you are looking at. So if you're not out there competing from that standpoint, you're going to lose your seat at the table. And that's the mentality that I have, and that's the mentality that I try to kind of breed within our leadership group here with the LA Galaxy.
Wow. I've never heard anyone speak about, kind of protecting your role like that. It's very similar to if you were the striker for the team. And
Yeah.
it's this idea of there's someone on the bench or someone in a different team wanting that role. I've never heard anyone speak about, a corporate or front office role in that way. That's a different
Yeah. And,
perspective than
and
I've
you know, and
heard.
I have this conversation all the time when inside sales reps, ticket sales reps transition over to full-time front office positions. And I said, hey, look, anybody can go in an inside sales capacity and do really well for 4 to 6 months. Then you get a little bit of money in your pocket, you start closing some more deals, people start recognizing you in the hallway. You get a little bit of an elevated credential access. You start walking a little bit with the swagger, but can you keep it? Right? Not only can you keep it, but can you even do more? Right? Can you win salesperson of the month one month? But what about twice? Maybe three. How about four in a row? Right? What about five? And these are the types of, and again, this sometimes, Matt, this isn't for everyone. And I stress this to people all the time in that, hey, don't be like me. You don't have to be like me. Just be you. Right. If you're competitive and you want it, and this is the goal that you strive. If you want to buy a house before you're 25, then that's very ambitious, but go ahead and do it. Right. But you're going to have to put in the work. You want to be salesperson of the month or the month. You want to win 6 consecutive months, or you want to win salesperson of the year. That's totally fine, but you're going to have to put in the work because it is extremely hard. You have to be extremely disciplined and focused every single day. Like there's no days off, and that's okay. It just comes with the territory. And again, it's not for everyone, and it's for a very select few. And for those who choose not to, it's okay too, right? There's a balance that I think every person has to find, whether you're in marketing, whether you're in sales, whether you're in operations. Everybody kind of has their cadence. You just have to find out what that is. And my job as a leader of the department is to motivate and to push. And if they need my help and guidance, and there's things there that I can help push them, then I will. But if they want to go the other way, then that's fine too. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we need people performing at their highest level regardless. And, in order to accomplish the goals, as you know, we're in a very competitive market here in Southern California with multiple sports teams, beautiful weather, the beaches, entertainment, concerts. So if we're not competing at the highest level, we're gonna drown, right? And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what it's about.
Yeah, one of the things that I had a question about was what do you guys do and how do you leverage like your location being in LA to meet those standards that you guys have set for yourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to one of the unique things too is, you guys asked me the difference between, transitioning over from the NBA to soccer, and that soccer is a very unique sport, as I have found, in that when people are passionate about soccer, it's like nothing I've ever seen before. Like you can't compare it to anything. And I've worked in basketball, and I've seen almost 800 live NBA games. I've obviously have been a big baseball fan for almost 30 years. And so I've been around the sports. I've been around all the sports. Like I'm like 100% invested in all of these sports. But so I feel like I have some authority to say this, but there's nothing that compares to a fan or an employee who is so passionate about soccer. You see it on the field, you see it with supporters, you see it with how they engage with the sport. It's nothing like I've ever seen. Like they are just something about just being a soccer fan. It's just doesn't compare to anything. And again, I say that as somebody who's a massive NBA fan and baseball fan and football fan. Nothing compares to being a soccer fan. Um, and you're right, David. Like being able to, I mean, think about it from our market. You have the LA Dodgers, right, who have had tremendous success over the last 5 years. Not to mention the success that they've had historically, both in Brooklyn and LA. You have a little team called the LA Lakers, who are constantly competing for championships. You think about the early years, at least for me, with the Shaq and the Kobe runs, and then Kobe had his own run with Paul Gasol, and then LeBron James came and they had their run, and currently they're in that market now. Then you have the LA Kings, who's also owned by AEG, who also had a decent run in the mid 2000s, a couple Stanley Cups. You have the Ducks, the Angels, so like the list goes on in terms of being able to not only from recruit staff, but also from trying to engage fans, right? So I think it's kind of unique in that for us, I think that we're a little bit more fortunate because, as I mentioned, like I think if you love soccer and you played soccer, you want to work in soccer, right? Like I've had multiple really good salespeople that have worked here and work here that I know can be making selling like even higher end in terms of like hospitality at some of these bigger venues, but they won't leave, right? Because they have an affinity with the Galaxy and they're just such big soccer fans that they could never see themselves selling in the NBA or selling in NFL because they just don't have the passion to do it. And so I've seen it firsthand. So, we're fortunate enough to be able to uh, cultivate talent like that here. And again, that's why for me, it's not about, hey, let's take advantage of that opportunity. For me, it's like, okay, well, how can we provide these types of salespeople the platform so that they not only can thrive on the passion of working in soccer, but that they are financially motivated to continue to do so, and there's a career path for them. That's my thing is like, hey, look, if we identify somebody that's good, let's not work them to the ground. Let's give them a platform where they not only can work in a sport that they love, but they can also make some money in it, and there's a career path for them. So let's keep them, right? Let's keep them in our bubble. Let's not let them go to another team because they're going to make an extra 30 or $40,000 a year, because we know that gap closes just with the passion that they have for working here. And the same for the fans. Like our fans are extremely passionate. Soccer fans in general are extremely passionate. We know that they have a lot of options to go to when it comes to coming to sports, live sports entertainment. So the fact that they choose us, our job and responsibility is putting on a show, is to provide great customer service experience, great fan experience during the game, and great experience as it relates to their interactions with the front office. So we take that extremely seriously because we know that any dollar spent with us could be spent somewhere else. And for us, retention, it's much easier to retain a fan than to go out and try to find a new one. So that is an important part to this when you're trying to compete with some of these. Because again, David, I don't even think that we're competing, because you can't compete. You have to just find your own lane, and you have to capitalize on what your fans and what your staff loves about what you do, and just be the best at that.
That's one of the things that we've heard from the people we've interviewed, is you kind of just have to figure out what you guys want to do to improve everything, and that's how you proceed. Which it's awesome to hear that again from you. The next thing I want to ask is, as we kind of spoke about, you are in the same market with a bunch of other teams. For each sport, you have basically two teams in each of the major sports leagues. Obviously, you guys have the relationship with the LA Kings with the same ownership group. How do you guys kind of, I wouldn't say pick and choose, but how do you guys work with the other teams in the area? Because obviously there is a little bit of cross promotion. And then also, how do you leverage that rivalry that you have going on in the same town? How does, I guess, the cross communication between sports go in LA?
Yeah, my counterparts in other teams locally here, we all face a lot of the same challenges, right? Like in some instances, one of the teams may have a great year, and maybe some of the objections that they otherwise would have heard, they kind of dissipate a little bit. They go away for a season. But as you know, sports is just so cyclical that they'll come back, right? If the team may perform really well one year, and then the next year they don't perform well, and then you're back at the same things that you've been facing. And one of the things that I've learned over the almost 20 years that I've been doing this is, we all face the same challenges, right? Recruitment, retention, overcoming objections, generating revenue, generating more revenue, taking a look at premium. What is premium? How are you competing from that? Because we haven't even touched on premium and kind of how that's changed from all of these different venues. You have the Clippers opening up Intuit Dome this fall. You have SoFi that opened up a few years ago. That's an incredible stadium. Some of the upgrades that crypto.com arena recently had. So like there's a whole nother world from that standpoint that we haven't touched on either. But I think it's just, we face a lot of the same challenges. So having a relationship with multiple different leaderships with different teams is an important part of this role. And, really understanding it is an important part to kind of building your culture, because if you don't know what someone else is doing, even though maybe it doesn't dictate how you lead or what you do, but it's certainly important to know. And I think that definitely has an effect on kind of how we view things. But ultimately, at the end of the day, as I mentioned before, you have to kind of pick your own lane and what's good for your culture, and kind of your fans and kind of your revenue goals and expectations. But it is good to know kind of what other organizations are doing, especially locally here.
And I noted you mentioned the opening game this year, and it was somewhat of, the stars aligning when it comes to this window that Messi is in the country and who gets to have a chunk of his attendance, especially now that he's not even playing at the moment because he's hurt, and there's that rolling the dice of getting a sellout crowd, and then, albeit it's still Suarez, Busquets, and Jordi Alba and the rest of the team, but everyone is there to see Messi really this season. So the stars aligned, and you were hosting Miami for the first game of the season, season opener. How did the preparation for this season opener differ to all of the ones you've had in the past, given Messi was in town?
Soccer is just such a unique sport, and it just brings out a different level of excitement. Like the magnitude that this game had over anything that I've ever worked or compared was unbelievable. Really, the only thing that I would compare it to was Zlatan's first goal when he came here against LAFC, coming off the bench in the 70th minute and just kicking this rocket over the keeper's head. That was really and that was just like 20 seconds. This game had that for the entire 90 minutes, and really the entire 3 months leading into it when the schedule was announced in December. But the magnitude of this game was incredible. I mean, we prayed, we hoped that this game would happen even before it did. I mean, because we knew that the impact and the magnitude that this would have for not only for the Galaxy, but for our fans, and for everyone here locally in Los Angeles, is that it would be a Super Bowl type event for us, and it lived up to everything that it could, and it took a very strenuous planning process and really trying to understand, how to sell this game, what this game meant to our season ticket holders, and really trying to make sure from a revenue standpoint that we were doing the right thing and protecting the integrity of the game, and positioning us well, not only for the home opener, of course, but what did that look like for the entire season?
Yeah, I'd imagine for anyone that gets lucky enough to hold a home game with Miami coming and it not be on turf, otherwise he won't come, is definitely a blessing. Another massive game that you've led the efforts for was the July 4th game last year at the Rose Bowl. And that is, a stadium that is 3 times the size of your regular home stadium. So what did the Seals efforts behind that game look like in comparison to, albeit it was an El Tráfico game, so there is this, I would assume LAFC were also pushing some Seals towards the stadium, but
Mhm.
how did the process behind just tripling the size of the capacity look like compared to any other home game?
Yeah, they were both unique in a sense where, you have the Rose Bowl, which, has over 80 to 100,000 seats. And then you had um, Dignity Health Sports Park, which, has a third of that. It's almost like when you're tasked in college with saying like, hey, you have to write this essay, but you only get 250 words, where it's almost harder to do that than to have to write a paper that you could, do 1,000 or 1,200 words, right? Because you have to be very specific and you can't miss, right? Because for us, building out that Miami game with the limited inventory that we have outside of this, because we already had an X number of seats already committed to season ticket holders, right? So we took whatever was left and we said, okay, how are we going to sell these seats? Like, what is the best situation on how we move forward with these seats? And then what are some other opportunities that we have to add seats, right? How can we really push the envelope? What can we do? How can we be creative? And then when you have the Rose Bowl, you have, well, how are we going to sell 80,000 plus seats, right? How are we going to tell that story, not only to our fans, because we are otherwise taking a game that otherwise would have been played here in a Galaxy focused fan stadium to a Rose Bowl stadium with massive seats, which could be, 50-50, right? With LAFC fans and Galaxy fans. But really charting that trajectory on like, how are you going to sell this game? Because that one you had a little bit more flexibility because you had more seats, but at the same time you were like, well, how are you going to sell that many seats when you typically only sell, to sell the stadium out 25,000 plus seats? How are you going to triple that number and get in the position to, to get to that number that you need to get to for the Rose Bowl? So there were just both different perspectives. Obviously, with the Rose Bowl game last year, it ironically ended up being on the same day that the Miami game was scheduled this year, but last year got rained out. And we had to move the game to July 4th. So that became another challenge for that match. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that it worked out because July 4th was such a big momentum for us and a big game that's why we're kind of running it back. So again, each game had its unique circumstances and its challenges. But for Miami, again, it was just more about maximizing inventory. And for the Rose Bowl, it was like it was trying to figure out how you can sell that match at that volume, and obviously still try to find a way to generate revenue.
And then obviously we're mentioning Messi and Miami being able to craft this seal strategy, marketing strategy around having him as well as the other players that they've got at the moment. As we've mentioned, names like Zlatan, the Galaxy have definitely had the most, global names, kind of, starting with when Beckham came and kind of set the path for, all the players to come, like Gerrard and Keane and Zlatan and Chicharito have been in your time. What has building a sales strategy around a player look like in comparison to, a season where there might not have been a massive name, and it's just there are these names that people know, but they might not be globally recognized names that tourists would be coming to
Sure.
see this player.
Yeah. Ironically, Matt, it's not that much different. And I think that goes back to kind of what I discussed about just culture. One of the biggest things that I stress to leadership a lot is, give us a story and we'll capitalize on it, right? If the team is doing extremely well and we have a player like Zlatan or Chicharito or Gerard or some of these marquee players that we've had in the past, we'll capitalize on it. We have a structure, we have a plan. Maybe we tweak pricing a little bit here, or maybe we limit ticketing over here, and we leverage this other asset. And it's really a lot of the same. And I think that's what's an important piece is like you build a sales strategy around not necessarily, because one of the things that I've learned over time, especially having worked in multiple different sports, especially in the NBA, is that you can't necessarily rely too heavily on individual players as much as you would like, because as you know, they get hurt, which is, Messi's hurt now, right? In my time in the NBA, it was Chris Paul and Blake Griffin and like the Lob City era. And, sometimes those guys got hurt and, eventually they got traded. And so you have to be able to be prepared to move forward, right? So if you're leaning so heavily on these players and really the success of your team and your revenue lies on whether or not this player is on your team, you're in a very dangerous position, right? So you have to have a strategy that allows you to kind of move forward. It's almost, I don't know how many, if you guys will, I mean, if you know kind of the San Antonio Spurs with the reputation that they have with Greg Popovich and that they build a culture of winning, right? Whether it's this player or that player, it's the next man up. They're not doing so well now, but they've had such a winning culture over Greg Popovich's 20 plus year as a head coach that it's less about any individual players and it's more about the culture. And I think that has more to do with it. I wish I could tell you like, hey, look, we had this strategy for Zlatan and Chicharito and this, but it's really more about just like an overall culture and sales strategy that just allows us to take advantage of the opportunity and capitalize on it more so than, hey, now that he's here. And obviously, clearly with that, there's a lot more interest. So it makes it a little bit easier to kind of put a lot of these things in motion, but the philosophy and like the thought process is very similar.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Especially it's in the MLS in particular, the big names, they don't stay for too long. That
Yeah.
you do have this window, so yeah, you shouldn't probably build this whole ethos around an individual player. But how has that in terms of the entire sales efforts and being able to build a culture around the team changed since you've joined the club, given how much the league and the sport has grown? And obviously there's another massive half decade coming up with the tournaments coming. Obviously Messi being here now is driving more interest. How has the ability or ways that you've been selling tickets, selling sponsors, broadcast deals, obviously the Apple one is the new one, how has that adapted with the growth of the game and the league?
Yeah, again, I mentioned this is my coming up on my 7th year with the club, and even in that time, the game has evolved tremendously from a business standpoint. Obviously, being connected with Apple, such a massive and top tier brand is great for MLS, and it's great for every team across the entire league. So that's been a huge plus for us. And one thing that I think a lot of people forget is the league isn't that old, right? When you think about some of these Premier League teams or some of these European teams where they've been around over 100 years, 80 years, the team is just over 25 years old. And to think that the progress that the league has made in that short window is pretty remarkable. And I know MLS sometimes gets a bad rap for just the quality of the play, that it's not the level of the European. And again, I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to weigh in on that. But I will tell you that just some of the more recent signings that have come over from Europe have kind of said like, hey, look, this is a very competitive league. It's a very physical league, and it's a lot different than it may have been a decade ago. And so, I think the perception is changing on kind of what that looks like from that standpoint. So, and I think as the league continues to grow, revenue continues to grow, interest in the league continues to grow, we continue to compete. One of the biggest challenges that I think that we still have is just still competing with the four major leagues, right? We're not, unless it's an unbelievable goal from Messi or one of these highlight bicycle kicks that we're not leading we're not leading Sports Center, right? It's not like leading into it and talking about it as they would as I would imagine in Europe, right? And I think that once we kind of get to that point, and I think as the World Cup comes here in the next few years, I think that could be another opportunity for us in North America to really take that next step and that next interest level. And that's going to be really, really big for the league, where we can be one of those top tier leagues as in terms of interest here that will take the next step for us.
Definitely. And obviously with the growth of the league, all of these financial tied deals will just naturally grow and be bigger. And obviously the Apple one has shown what that kind of power can do from a revenue standpoint. Everyone kind of knows the key pillars of revenue streams for professional sports clubs, like, ticketing, sponsorship deals, broadcast deals, food and beverage at the stadium, things like that. Is there any lesser known streams that the general public or someone who's not working in that scene just wouldn't really think of, that would surprise someone of how much money, this stream can bring in?
It's a great question. We are really big in the community when it comes to youth soccer. So we have an entire division focused in on Galaxy Youth. We own and operate two separate soccer centers. One is Soccer Center in the South Bay, and the other one is we recently built a park on campus called Galaxy Park. And we have year-round content from kids coming in and playing futsal. We activate it. We're out in the community doing camps and clinics. That is a major revenue stream for us that you otherwise wouldn't. We don't hit you over the face with it, but it is not only an opportunity for us to generate a little bit of revenue, but more importantly, it's a great marketing and brand opportunity to be in the community and to outfit these young soccer fans in Galaxy uniforms and hopefully find their way into the stadium one day.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And with the interest that the team has, I'm sure it's a bit easier to pull in those, community relations. Again, it was hard when I was a one-man show for a tiny club playing at a high school that I can actually see from my apartment window right now across the street. So I'm sure it's a whole different experience.
We get a massive benefit from the logo, right? From the shield, from the crest, in that we are extremely recognizable and people know who we are. They immediately want to engage with us. So we're fortunate in that sense. As I mentioned before, it's our job just to capitalize on that and really every day come in with how am I going to not only position in the club in the right way, but how am I going to make another Galaxy fan? Right? And how am I going to not only, if I can't bring him to the game, can I get him to wear a kit, right? Can I get him to, that was another thing, Matt, that I learned. You say jerseys, you say kit, you don't say field, you say pitch. These are just all things that you learn when you transition over from a non-soccer fan. But I feel like I'm kind of made that leap and I can actually hold a conversation with other soccer fans. Like, it makes me feel good, but just another anecdote.
Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be more to come as well, especially with as more internationals crowd over here, and they'll bring new terms that even David and I, who have been in soccer our entire lives, will have never heard of. So there's a ton of other questions we'd love to ask. I know we're almost at time, so hopefully we can have you on again in the future with more questions to ask. But before we wrap up, we've been making a bit of a tradition of just doing a few quick fire questions where you can give us, couple words or a sentence or a couple of sentences, just off the bat of a couple of questions. So, first one, if the Galaxy were to sign any player while you're at the club, who would you want that to be?
Oh man. Um, you know, one of the things that I guess this is just a fantasy land question. I mean, I think it would probably be Mbappe for sure. If we're just playing fantasy and there's no absolutely salary cap or money restrictions, I think that would be a wonderful opportunity to have a player of his talent and his skill to represent us. But you know, maybe in another 15 years we might see him.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. 15 years ago, Messi was probably a fantasy player that someone
Sure.
was
Yeah,
thinking
you're
about.
right. You're
So,
right. Yeah, you're right.
yeah. But yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. And
Yeah.
then next one, obviously you've been in a few different sports. Obviously, we've talked about some of the big names, the big, wins you've had in terms of attendance records and things like that. What has been your favorite or maybe your personally most proud moment of your career so far?
For me, it's about the people. Like for me, it's about the opportunity that I've had to position the future leaders of the industry, the people that I've seen become account executives to supervisors, supervisors to managers, managers to directors. Um, that to me is the most rewarding, where you see people that have worked hard and who have trusted the process, who have trusted me to go through that process together with them. That to me is the most rewarding. And having done it again for almost 20 years and seeing some people that can reach that level is pretty amazing to see. So, that's probably the most rewarding thing for me.
Last question before we wrap it up. This can be professionally or this can be personally, something going on in your own life. What is the one thing that you're most looking forward to for the rest of 2024?
At the onset of this season, and this would have been with Messi or without, the fact that we started with a caliber player like him, and also with the quality team that we have on our end, this is going to be the best year that we've had, both from a revenue standpoint. I've been doing this again for a long time, and I haven't won a championship yet. And something told me this year that this would be the year. This would be the opportunity that I have to actually put a sports ring on my finger and to be able to represent that, because I haven't had that chance yet. Been close, but that's been something that has been eluded me thus far, but is still very important to me. So I think that's what I'm looking forward to: multiple sellouts, continued engagement, but ultimately at the end of the day, hopefully, hoisting a trophy at the end of the year.
Definitely, definitely. Awesome, Uriel. Thank you again, and
Thank you
best of
so much,
luck
Uriel.
on and off the pitch, not the field, the pitch this season. Hopefully, all your goals and your KPIs are hit.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for watching this episode of Off the Pitch. Don't forget to drop a follow or subscribe on the podcast platform you're listening from. That helps us bring stories like these to your ears each and every week. And if you have a minute, leave a review as well, as that helps us grow the Off the Pitch community and bring even more exciting guests on. See you in the next one.